The Georgia State Election Board just moved one step closer to a potential takeover of Fulton County. The board appointed 3 people to conduct a performance review in the county. And the panel includes 1 Democrat, 1 Republican, and the general counsel for the Republican Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger. Fulton County is a Democratic bastion that includes Atlanta. President Joe Biden handily won there over Trump last election, drawing the now ex-commander-in-chief's ire. Fulton County was one of the targets of Trump's baseless and false fraud claims. Still, those fraud lies were part of what spurred Georgia's sweeping new elections law that allows the state to take over county election boards if deemed necessary. Republicans have long set their sights on Fulton County, which has been plagued for years by voting issues, including things like long lines, slow results, and administrative errors. But Democrats argue the review is a blatantly partisan takeover attempt, noting there was zero evidence of fraud there, and the 2020 election results were reaffirmed by 3 recounts. It's just one of the latest moves by Georgia when it comes to voting and elections. This week, the state removed more than 101,000 inactive voters from the rolls. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution reports that none of those removed voted in the 2020 general election or runoff. These removals happen regularly under Georgia law, but they became a hot-button issue in the 2018 gubernatorial race between Brian Kemp and Stacey Abrams. Kemp was Secretary of State at the time, meaning he was the one in charge of the voter purges and the election that he would ultimately win. In this latest round of voter cancellations, Abrams' group, Fair Fight, was among those helping voters maintain active status. State-level Democrats and organizers have also been urging Congress to act on voting rights. House Democrats introduced the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act this week. The bill, named after the longtime Georgia congressman and civil rights icon, aims to restore protections against voting discrimination gutted by the Supreme Court. On the Senate side, Georgia freshman Senator Raphael Warnock is working on a slimmed-down voting rights bill. He also introduced a bill to prevent election subversion, like the type critics say is happening in Georgia. But the rub facing any Democratic voting bill? The Senate filibuster. It's unlikely any of the Democrats' effort can garner enough GOP support. So where does that leave states like Georgia and others that are battling Republican attempts to limit access to the vote? Joining me now are Greg Bluestein, a reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and LaTosha Brown, co-founder of Black Voters Matter Fund. Thank you both very much for being here. Glenn, let me start with you. This move to the Republicans taking over Fulton County, what is the latest on that? And how worried should, Georgians be, but also Democrats be by this move?
Yeah, well, I always watch the Republican campaign trail rhetoric to see how serious these efforts are, and it is all Republicans seem to be talking about. It is on the tip of their tongues, along with opposition to vaccine mandates and support for overhaul of elections laws. And so we started spotting this at the AJC a few weeks ago and saw a trend towards pushing for this. And then you saw letters from top Republican lawmakers clearing the way for this review, and now it's advancing with this performance review. It's uncharted territory. I know it's a cliche we talk about a lot, but it really is, because we're not sure how long this process will last. We're not sure what to expect because it's never been done before here in Georgia. This is all set up by this law that was just passed a few months ago and signed into law by Governor Kemp. But Democrats and voting rights activists are on guard because it is moving forward, and all the rhetoric out there on the Republican side has been calling for this takeover of Fulton County elections, which, as you mentioned, is the most populous county in the state and one of the most important Democratic strongholds in Georgia.
Greg, I want to apologize. I called you Glenn. I'm sorry about that, Greg. LaTosha, you are one of those people who is on the ground. You've been on the ground. You've been organizing and registering people. Your reaction to what is happening in Fulton County?
A couple of things. I think it's really simple. This is cheating. This is political corruption 101. whenever you are in a democracy, and what you can have is a political party that can weaponize the administrative process so that when they don't like the voters or they don't like the outcome, they can decide that they're going to make it that much more difficult, that they can take over the election process. That in itself is political corruption. We have to call it what it is. And so what we're seeing right now is in this last election, there was a historic turnout of voters in Georgia, which led to an outcome that many in the Republican Party did not like. And so instead of them literally looking at how can they create an agenda that's more inclusive and more reflective of who makes up Georgia, they decide to weaponize the administrative process and be able to take over this process, which is essentially what Trump was calling for. What is happening right now is essentially what he wanted to happen, and they're actually following through with that. And so what we have to do, we also recognize that we've got to have federal legislation. This law is not like it's going to happen. It is happening now, that we're seeing the Republicans actually undermine democracy so that they can have an advantage in the future election.
You know, Greg, Senator Warnock spoke at the Atlanta Press Club today, and you were there. What did the senator say in regards to voting rights and the filibuster?
Well, he's pushing forward his slimmed down version of a federal voting rights expansion that would preempt some of these changes that the Georgia law is calling for. But he's also clear-eyed about the prospects of it moving forward in the Senate, where there is the filibuster. He supports rolling back elements of the filibuster when it comes to voting rights bills. But of course, without the support of Senators Manchin and Sinema, it is very hard on the Democratic side. It's very hard to even imagine that going forward. But he's not giving up on the voting rights expansion. He says it's part and parcel with the infrastructure measure that, of course, is getting so much attention. He sees the voting rights measures as boning up the infrastructure of America's democracy.
Mm-hmm. And Latasha, you're in Georgia and registering voters and being a part of the process there, but you have your ear to the ground, and I'm sure you're talking to folks here in Washington as a part of the voting rights effort on Capitol Hill. How confident are you that Democrats will be able to, one, get a voting rights bill passed through the Senate, whether with or without the filibuster?
You know, I think we're going to have to end the filibuster. There's no way around it. The truth of the matter is we have the political party that is actually being obstructionist in a process. What they've shown is they're the biggest perpetrators of voter suppression. And so it's not going to happen unless we end the filibuster. I do think that there's the possibility we have to continue to apply pressure for the Democrats, in which literally when we're looking at the people of Georgia, the reason why the Democratic Party has power and advantage right now is because of the people of Georgia, the voters of Georgia. And now the voters of Georgia are being under attack. And so what I think you're going to see is a sustained effort to actually apply pressure, whether it's through direct action, whether it's organizing. We're actually having a national event on the 28th, next Saturday, which is really, we're calling for, we're calling a good trouble rally, where we're actually calling for the end of the filibuster. Those that may remember what happened in the voting rights movement and in the vote and on the March on Washington, one of the first things that was actually called by Dr. King and others was the end of the filibuster, because it's always in many ways been used and weaponized against civil rights legislation. So there's no way around it. It has to be carved out, eliminated, or whatever. It cannot be a tool that continues to operate as a barrier for democracy and for voting rights.
Last question to you, Greg, and that is this. I mean, Democrats have seen the pressure being applied with, the Texas Democrats coming to Washington, applying pressure on voting rights from a Democratic perspective. But I'm just wondering, in Georgia, does any of this stuff have any impact on the way Republicans are viewing what's happening and what they're doing? Do they even care?
And look, Republicans and Democrats are using these issues to energize their base. For a while there, especially after Major League Baseball yanked the All-Star game from Metro Atlanta, it was the number one thing Republicans were talking about, voter integrity, about how MLB was being unfair to Georgia. And you're seeing it with the Democratic side too. In 2018, at first, there was a little hesitancy for Democrats to talk about voting rights because I think they worried that it would send the wrong signal to voters not to bother casting a ballot because it might not get counted anyway. But you saw a switch where they more aggressively talked about voting rights to say, hey, make a plan. And, we certainly saw that in 2020 with, hey, if you're first, if you can't wait in line for 4 hours at this precinct, use a drop box, use an absentee ballot, go on election day. So you saw that. So you're definitely seeing both parties trying to energize their base with these issues, but the Republicans are talking a lot about voter integrity and ballot access on their end as well.
All right, Greg Bluestein and LaTosha Brown, thank you both very, very much.